Hello and welcome to IGPP Expert Talks. I am Heena Goswami, Editorial Consultant with IGPP, Institute for Governance, Policies and Politics, New Delhi. In our ongoing series about AI, to talk about why education and awareness of emerging technologies such as AI is important, today we are joined by Ms. Nidhi Sudhan. Ms. Nidhi is a passionate advocate for responsible media in technology and the co-founder of Citizen Digital Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to fostering information literacy and AI governance in India. With 22 years of experience, Nidhi's dedication to tech stewardship and her commitment to ethical AI practices have earned her a place in the Global 100 Brilliant Women in AI Ethics 2024. Welcome to IGPP Expert Talks, Nidhi.
Thank you, Hina. Happy to be here. Very glad to be speaking to you.
So one of the major focuses of your work has been how to bridge the gap in end user awareness. Why do you believe that educating the public about AI is crucial, and what societal impact do you think that this awareness can create?
Thanks, Hina. So I think at the outset, I'd like to kind of also differentiate what we usually allude to as AI or artificial intelligence. It is essential to understand that the technology has been around for a while. It has been researched and applied on many fronts. Whereas what we often talk about right now are the AI-enabled products that have suddenly proliferated, especially thanks to generative AI, which is what has made it so accessible and made it part of the public use and conversations in general. And here, a lot of our conversations in this context might be in the context of generative AI as such. So now coming back to your question, if a new technology arrives and it has the potential to advance humanity and improve the quality of life for everyone, then people better know how to use it, right? And if that technology is powerful and has tremendous capabilities for both good and bad, then people need to be trained to use it to their advantage and not fall prey to the designs of vested interests. So I'll illustrate that using the example of, let's say, a bicycle, which we learn to basically ride. The technicality of riding a bicycle is what a rider needs to be able to ride a cycle and to be able to ride it safely. But when it comes to a car, you need to learn a bit more of, what the driving techniques are, and beyond that, what the driver's responsibilities are, what the road signs are, because the speed suddenly becomes a factor and the consequences could be determined based on the speed itself. And you need to basically get a license to be able to drive a car. Now, if you take a train or an airplane, that is also an automobile, a vehicle, but that's not something that a common user like us can start driving, even if we have, the ability to suddenly take licenses. You have to be a really trained driver of the train or a pilot to be able to drive these really big engines, so to speak. So as the scale of the technology increases, the capabilities increase, so do the risks, and therefore the specializations required also are therefore relevant to that. Now, there are the plus sides of generative AI is that it definitely is going to help bridge the digital divide. It will empower us economically. It will bring about advancements in healthcare. It will address social issues like improving access to information or disaster response, etc. But these things will develop when the process is participatory and it involves experts, academicians, and affected stakeholders from all communities and socioeconomic backgrounds, instead of the current situation where the access and concentration of resources and funds are being limited to urban startups and big businesses largely. So if the public is not truly educated, starting from the school and workplaces, about the functions and the uses, and how these power imbalances sometimes help shape what they get out of these digital technologies, many will end up becoming mere pawns of the market or politics or bad actors, and not exactly empowered entities who can wield the technology to their advantage. So, yeah.
One of the major ways the capability of AI has increased is its ability to hyper-personalize content and send a message. And do you think such things contribute to behavior manipulation And we have seen its use through like algorithms and echo chambers. There are especially that increase the divide, sort of politically in the society. And do you think such divides would also have long-term impact on the society and its psychological consciousness?
That's a great question. And as such, we know we live in a time when personalization of all these products and services and experiences and content are a great boon, right? Because it saves us time. They're more useful when it's personalized to my interests and my preferences. And it's also great value for the money or the time that you're spending consuming that particular element. So while that is very clear, it is important to take cognizance of the fact that what happens when the businesses or platforms that are meant to do this are incentivized to prioritize profits or reward investors or shareholders at all costs. Then the metrics of growth suddenly start compromising the other stakeholders' interests to amp up the bottom lines. When online platforms don't face intense scrutiny or regulatory oversight on these aspects, they get away with malpractices that are still not defined as malpractices in India, or sometimes are written off as a trade-off of economic boost. As this is explained in a study of regulatory entrepreneurship as well in much detail. Now, digital platforms today are at the center of public sense making and consumer decision making for half of India that is online, right? And they tap into human behavior and employ invisible dark patterns to maximize consumption of whether it's products, experiences, or content at the cost of individual well-being and rights or societal harmony and everything that is fundamental in a democracy. Social media per se has enabled election engineering, consensus hacking, astroturfing, all these because they're profitable. Now, they sure take some stances to prevent some overt fallouts as presented in their transparency reports, but these are barely country or context specific, and they have very little resource allocation. And therefore, they nowhere match the proliferation of misinformation and harmful content that is enabled by the original algorithms as such. Now, there are several long-term consequences, but I will point to one that we see evolving among children today who have been so hooked to the constant reward system of extractive digital designs since they are born that their attention spans, focus, mental health, cognitive and physiological development are all being compromised. And in the long run, the overall ability of these children when they grow up to be able to indulge in rigor, critical thinking, and complex problem solving, even as the complexities of the issues we face are intensifying, will likely end up diminishing if we don't undertake early interventions. So I hope that answers that.
One feels that these days there's a lethal combination of one, social media, and the other, which is rather new, is the AI generated content. And what that feels like that has enabled an information apocalypse, which, given the profound quality, and personalization with which AI generated content is circulated on social media, how do you view this? And we see its many pitfalls, but there are also like positive sides to the AI generated content and social media's ability to disseminate it at a wide level.
You're absolutely right, Heena. We know that the information overload is already a characteristic of social media, and the earlier AI-enabled streaming of personalized content, which happens constantly through our smart devices. Now, what generative AI is doing is it's muddying the waters further with hyper-realistic visual content and inaccurate text content that actually sounds super convincing. Generative AI at this stage is only capable of aiding people with speed, fine-tuning, automating rote and risky tasks like managing supply chains, automobile and construction safety checks, personalizing services like customer care, or some aspects of education and healthcare, and even multimodal operations, which are all fantastic if people understand well that that's what it does. However, it is being positioned or hyped as this ultimate solution to liberate creativity, think on our behalf, and do magic, which in its current scope is a highly suspect pitch. But people are falling for it. Now, as the quality of the visual outputs are improving with generative AI and we cross what is called the uncanny valley, they end up distorting reality And knowledge sources like research papers, search engines, Wikipedia, they distort evidence, creating what is known as the liar's dividend and enable more disinformation factories or adversarial state and threat actors than addressing the real issues. Now, there are umpteen papers already being written on it, that what are people actually using generative AI for? Studies point to the use of generative AI to create more deep fakes, disinformation, non-consensual intimate imagery, and students using it to write essays. There's a WEF World Economic Forum report that actually says that while in December 2018 there were shallow fakes to the count of around 8,000, by July 2019 that rose to 14,688, to the tune of that. And in August 2023, there were 15.47 billion AI generated deepfakes. And now we can only imagine where that number is going up, right? So where is it actually being used? What does it use to empower people with is where the question lies. The important thing to understand about generative AI technology is that the skill of prompting to regurgitate images or solutions from existing bodies of art or knowledge is not exactly empowerment of the people. The ability to critically assess and analyze its sources, uses, applications, consequences, and then apply the technology to resolve the issues and innovate new solutions is the real empowerment that we should be working towards.
It's funny because that you say that, generative AI may not be the liberator of creative energies that everyone claims it to be. And it just brings to my mind AI generated video that is being circulated on Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, sort of like their love making video. It's not creative, it's not funny, it looks like poor Photoshop to me. And somehow everybody on it was claiming that this could like such videos can change the electoral outcome, like shape it, and such satire would not be possible in other countries, and it's so liberating that way. And it made no sense to me, because to me it just looked like, who is getting influenced by looking at this video, which is like a poor portrayal, like the faces don't match, right? Anybody who is the least acquainted with the US politics or is going to vote won't be affected by this video. But for such a poor video, poor quality to generate like such sensations was just mind boggling to me. Um, but you talk of empowerment and what true empowerment would constitute of, and that brings me to my next question, that there has been a recent incident, a tragic case in Kolkata that happened and that sparked national outrage, and social media played a major role in spreading information, in being able to mobilize protest around the country. And despite the fact that there are clear Supreme Court guidelines that one cannot disclose the victim's identity, her name and her photo had gone viral. So, what is your take on handling such sensitive information? And I begin with this aspect of empowerment, because to many a people, like maybe the gravity of the incident or the brutality of it wouldn't have come had they not seen maybe the pictures of it, or had they not been like I'm sure there are a lot of layers to it, but for some people, like the brutality of it wouldn't have been captured had they not seen those pictures. And there were arguments on social media saying that, why do you deny her identity even after death? So, how do you see this? And should the social media content moderation teams be responsible for ensuring that Supreme Court guidelines, which dictate that identity should not be disclosed, they should not be violated?
Like you rightly said, there are several layers and it is a very complex issue. But one thing that's very clear about what social media does in such instances is that it thrives on the different kinds of narratives or rhetorics that are floating online at that time. So there are like you rightly said, whether her identity should be concealed or not is actually something that has been given due diligence by the court, and there is a reason why it is said that the victim's identity should not be revealed. But social media is a place to pontificate. Everybody can have an opinion, and when everybody is sharing an opinion, it means engagement for the platform. And as long as these opinions are divisive, it's more engagement. So we also see the not all men and always the man narrative also driving this kind of a force. So definitely social media is not a place where people can really find a solution to this issue. And like you also rightly said, when people are trying to look for the sensational details of the incident instead of addressing the root cause of it, when people are trying to look for the political interests behind this instead of addressing the issue behind it, it is merely feeding into the voyeurism that exists in all of us. It is nowhere addressing the solution. So to be able to come to a discussion on solutions, we have to find affected people, affected genders, experts in the area who have done due diligence and studies to understand the complexities of an issue, and not exactly have random discussions and expressions of hate and emotion online, because that is just a bubble. And each of us are living in those different kinds of filter bubbles that will keep us engaged with no real outcome. So for the real outcome, as I was saying in my earlier instance, also empowerment is not about just suddenly giving a tool to everybody and saying that, hey, come on, even you can do this now. It is about being able to use that tool effectively, productively, and to the people's advantage. So yeah, that's what my thoughts are.
As you correctly point out, that half of the nation, or maybe half of the world actually, is receiving their news through social media. Uh, and and I was talking to another expert, like a political scientist from the US, and I said, "Oh, such things have been said on a podcast and on social media platforms about Kamala Harris, and like they shouldn't, like, how could somebody say things like that?" And then they mentioned that, such content, such medias are not regulated. But traditional medias would never say such things. So, in that context, do you think that these intermediary platforms should be held to the same legal standards as the traditional media? Or what kind of, arrangement can curb the negative impact of digital media and place and some onus on these intermediaries who are, clearly prioritizing their profit rather than the impact that it would have on the society?
Yes, Heena. In fact, this is something that we often bring up in our workshops and sessions, that not just regulate social media on the same benchmarks as traditional broadcast media, but in fact, it requires very specific regulations because of the nature, complexity, and scale of consequences. Unfortunately, none of the, or most of the regulations that apply to traditional media also at this point do not control digital media. Now, we often illustrate this through examples of what used to be possible. Let's take a propaganda example, for instance. If you could spend a certain number of dollars or rupees on 5 television channels or 5 newspapers, the reach of that information would be, let's say, one state or one geographic region, and it is still nowhere personalized, as opposed to a tweet or a post which has the potential to reach a large number of people. And what through that is possible, therefore, is deep mass consolidation or consensus manufacturing as such. Now, when the potential of this technology is such, it has to be regulated on those yardsticks. And often I'd like to put a disclaimer here: when we call for regulation, it is again not a binary approach that, okay, all social media elements are bad. There is an aspect of what it does in terms of giving a voice to the common man, eliminating the gatekeeper or media, all that. But while we take regulation into consideration, we must factor in that it cannot be at the cost of one person's freedom of expression being protected versus another's being suppressed. It has to apply equally to everybody. So if we are seeing that, certain powerful influencers are able to get their voice across, even when it comes to harmful, dangerous content, Whereas if an activist or a journalist is trying to voice concern over something, their voice is suppressed by the social media algorithms, then there is foul play. There needs to be transparency around what kind of voices are being regulated. The earlier instance also, what you said about this particular rape instance that has happened, people are trying to look for what has happened, and the social media algorithms are catering a lot of misinformation also around the incident per se. And in that process, it is fueling emotions to take sides, belong to factions, and again distract from the core issue. So, which is why, coming back to why it is necessary to hold social media to account in a country specific way is very important. And this has to be done through participative programs. It cannot just be done as a self-regulation approach by an intermediary, nor can it be a high-handed regulation from the government. It has to be participatory. It has to be. So in this particular instance, again, going back to the Kolkata rape incidents, it is possible for the social media platforms to suppress or, hold or arrest the spread of misinformation. But they are not incentivized to do that because it is creating the chatter and engagement that they so badly need, and there is no regulation to stop them. We've also spoken to some of the other CSOs working in this space, especially on online child safety, and they speak about how platforms often say that there are not enough regulations stopping us from doing this in India. And even if there are, or if some fines come our way, they're very minuscule. The fines are really not of the same order as an EU or a US or an Australia imposes upon the platform for them to actually shake up their system and take conscious calls. It is really minuscule and it's easily dismissible, and then they move on to the next bit.
In our previous panel discussion, you talked about the danger of a single story. What is it, and how are social media platforms contributing to it?
Yes, I borrow that phrase from the author Chimamanda Adichie. And I'd like to illustrate that here using Plato's allegory of the cave, if you indulge me. Imagine three prisoners who have lived their whole lives chained in a cave facing a blank wall. There's a fire behind them, which is a source of light, and the objects move in front of the fire behind the prisoners. So that casts a shadow on the wall in front of them. This is all that they get to see, the shadows on the wall moving all their lives. And this naturally becomes their reality, their single story. One day, a prisoner escapes and sees the real world outside under the sunlight. Now, he understands what they have been seeing inside was a mere fragment of reality and is now able to distinguish the objects from their shadows. Now, what happens if he runs back inside to tell the other prisoners that the reality is actually something else? Most likely, they will dismiss him entirely and call him a fool. And then imagine that one prisoner wants to believe this guy who went out. But another man comes and keeps whispering into his ear that the guy who went out is actually mad and wants to kill everyone else. So this is the social media's present day role and form. And what I'm trying to establish through this illustration is social media has created unique filter bubbles for each of us to keep us engrossed and scrolling continuously. In fact, our social media experience are now so intertwined with our biases and vulnerabilities that even our mindful engagements are often fragments of realities created uniquely for us, which we have started rationalizing as well. The danger of the single story then becomes that you not only don't see another story, but also refuse to believe that there could be one other than yours. We already know that our timelines are customized to our identities, beliefs, and preferences. But imagine this. You see a post of a woman returning home late after work. The comments that you see on the post are all supportive of the woman's hustle, her courage, and the struggle in a difficult world, reinforcing everything that you already know and believe in. On the other hand, a male colleague of yours sees the same post, but the comments he sees are on how the woman is dressed, how she's asking for trouble by staying out late, or she's a bad mother for prioritizing work, or making it difficult for men at workplace, or something as such. Now imagine that at scale. You see how this can shape the thinking of people and keep them divided and polarized. Why keep people polarized? Because people are more valuable consumers when they're dissatisfied or angry or anxious or at each other's throats, not so much when they're happy and content. That kind of sums it up.
One of the important aspects of awareness, I believe, is also having a positive perception of the technology, maybe. And when we talk of perception, I'd like to mention that we at IGPP published a report, what Indian parliamentarians think of AI. And surprisingly, or maybe not so surprisingly, the report reveals that our parliamentarians have like a negative perception of the technology and little to no awareness of how it really works. And this is worrying because we believe that such perception would permeate to their constituents. Do you think, as much as it is important to educate end users, the public at large, it's also equally or more important to educate the policymakers, the leaders, and they should have a special responsibility and should lead by example in how they use the technology? Because during the election time, we saw a lot of AI generated content being freely shared by leaders without like a disclaimer that this is AI generated. Even now, we are seeing that, leaders with mass following take the lead in disseminating content that is not verified or, is not advisable to share. So, is it also important for leaders to lead by example then?
Fully agree with you, Hina. In fact, I went through the report and I saw some 62% of the parliamentarians did not understand what data's role in AI is. And I believe around 38% think that AI shouldn't be regulated. But the one positive aspect that I saw in your report was also that everybody, I think around 100% of them, want to learn more about AI. So, which is a good sign. And we must understand that parliamentarians alone don't function as independent people. They are advised by a really strong body of bureaucrats, administrators, policymakers, and everyone. So they themselves have the capabilities and learnings and the updated knowledge about these developments, and which is then transferred on to elected representatives as well. I can speak about Kerala because we are involved in the system here, where they have an Institute of Management in Government which conducts frequent trainings for government officials, the ministers, the cabinet ministers, and bureaucrats, and everybody on a frequent basis to keep them updated on a range of skills and developments that are happening. So that is something that even if not at the union ministry level, I don't know how it happens over there, but at state levels, of course, all governments can initiate something like that, and it's much needed. As in, you cannot regulate something that you don't know about, right? So it's very important for the leaders to understand. And as I always say, my positive approach towards AI development and growth is participatory. It cannot be positive without participation and equal representation.
Thank you so much, Nidhi, for joining us today.